Thomas Green here with the Peaceful Parenting Podcast, and we have Jake Morgan. Hello, Jake.
Hello, Thomas.
And a special guest by the name of Rabia Subhani. Rabia, welcome.
Hello, thanks.
It is our pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I am a licensed psychologist in the US, and I started off my training as a pediatric neuropsychologist, and I specialized in autism. This was back in the late 90s. And I ultimately had a child with autism, which was ironic, but I tell everybody that at least I knew what to do because I'd already had the training. And when he was younger, I did a lot of alternative type therapies with him, such as mindfulness and meditation, and just teaching him little tools to help him from getting overwhelmed. And all that was really well and worked really well with him. And he did well with grounding himself when he was overwhelmed and stressed until he hit puberty around when he was actually a little earlier. So he was around 10, and we went through a lot of life changes, and all of the techniques I taught him kind of went out the door. And so he really struggled with behavior changes. To be fair to him, we went through a lot of changes. He changed school several times, residences, and children with autism and other neurodiverse challenges don't do well with changes usually. So it was kind of understandable why he, had all these difficulties. But I figured that since I couldn't change his behavior because nothing I was doing was working, that maybe I needed to change how I was responding to him. And so I went on my own personal journey, and I immersed myself in mindfulness, and I did lots of spiritual retreats, and I learned about self-compassion. And along this course, I realized that what I had been missing was that when I taught him mindfulness, I didn't do it for myself. I just taught him because I thought he's the one that has the issues, right? Not me. And so when it came time to actually implement those things, he couldn't do it because I wasn't modeling it and I wasn't responding in a mindful way to him. And with that epiphany, I realized, you know what? This is something that I need to go and teach other parents with neurodiverse children, because it had such a profound impact on me once I learned to do mindfulness for myself, and the relationship with my son changed. I guess my own personality changed, not personality, but my behaviors changed. I became much more calmer, relaxed. I wasn't as quick to explode when something went wrong in our parenting relationship. And I felt called to teach this to other parents. So I completely retrained. I don't know how familiar you are with neuropsychology, but there's a lot of training involved with that. But I was so passionate about this that I completely retrained for the last 3 or 4 years. And so now I teach mindfulness to families that have children with neurodiverse challenges. That's my passionate calling, so to speak.
It's a great introduction. Thank you.
A little bit longer than
The topic of conversation that we were going to talk about was mindful parenting. So, I mean, you've touched on it, but to what degree with mindful parenting do you focus on the parent, and how much is on the child? And how would you explain it to people if they weren't aware of the term?
Okay, so mindfulness in general is bringing your attention to the present moment with a loving, non-judgmental awareness. So you're basically accepting what's going on in that moment without passing judgment on it, without coming from a place of anger and rage or whatever. You're trying to accept it as it is and then deal with it as you go on. So when you do mindful parenting, you kind of bring that piece into your parenting relationship. And your goal is to take the time to actually respond instead of react in letting your emotions overrule you and letting anger come out. And sometimes people bring their own past histories into their relationships with their children as well. So your goal is to step out of that automatic thinking and bring more loving awareness to the situation. And I focus mainly on parents because after my own personal journey, I realized that if you are just teaching the children and not teaching the parents, that's maybe 1/3 of what you need to do. The parents really need to be not only doing these practices for themselves, but also doing it so they're modeling it for their children. The children need to see, well, how do you react when you're in a stressful situation? And if mom is exploding, well, maybe that's what I need to be doing. And so teaching the parents is almost more important, I think, than teaching the children. So right now, my focus is on parent training. I do incorporate child training in the programs. I do have an online program where it's a intensive 8-week online program where I teach parents, but I also have lessons in there for the kids. And then later on this year, I want to make some programs that are geared specifically towards the kids. But I do recommend that parents learn it first, because for several reasons. One, I just, like I already mentioned, that you need to be modeling, but also parents, especially parents of neurodiverse children, have a lot of self-blame and guilt, and they don't have time for themselves. So I teach them about self-compassion, which is one of the four main components of the program I teach. Is mindfulness, self-compassion, positive psychology, and neuroscience. So I want parents to learn how to be self-compassionate as they're dealing in their parenting situations as well. So yeah, to answer your question, I focus on parents more.
The self-compassion, obviously, it's a key component, as you said. Is it because it's often very difficult for the parents to understand how to help their child, and therefore they kind of feel guilty? Is that a common experience that they have?
Absolutely. I think a lot of parents, especially of children with neurodiverse challenges, have a lot of blame and guilt about, am I doing it right? Did I do something wrong? Why? Or if they struggle with losing their temper or yelling or shouting, they're like, I should be doing better because my child already has challenges. And so speaking with parents over the years, I've realized that there is so much blame and guilt going on that sometimes they can't step out of that to be able to even effectively parent, because they're struggling with their own issues. And so one of the main things I think these parents like me need is self-compassion, is just to be able to accept, that what's going on is not your fault. You're not alone. Accept yourself for just as you are. Offer yourself compassion like you would, a best friend who was struggling with this. And so I think it's so important for parents to have that self-compassion piece, in addition to learning how to mindfully parent, and then positive psychology, because we need to have hope for the future, not just dealing with what's going on right now. So instilling that optimism.
What would you say? Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead. No, after you.
What would you say is the point of differentiation between teaching mindfulness or mindful parenting to parents with a neurodiverse child versus any other child? So what are the differences there? Because my general thoughts are that I would think mindfulness applies regardless, but those are
yes, it does. It absolutely does. The reason I focused on families with neurodiverse children is because I bring in a lot of the research that's done with families that have neurodiverse children. So I focus some of the things a little bit more clear cut on, things like if your child is impulsive, or, your child has behavior issues, or like children with autism have very repetitive routines, and how to help them, get out of that and help them focus. So mindful parenting is absolutely applicable to any parent. But there are lots and lots of programs and things already out there to teach mindful parenting to typical parents. So I gear mine more towards neurodiverse families, because that's what my personal experience is and what my specialty has always been. And also because I gear my research studies that I bring into, I'm pretty science-based, so I like to bring in a lot of research. And so all of my pull out is from, I try to gear it towards families that have neurodiverse challenges. But yeah, you can use any of these techniques for anybody, any child.
I was going to ask, it seems that originally you were a psychologist, and you as you said, there was a huge amount of training that you needed to do, and you had a lot of experience in doing that, and yet you decided through your own experience that it wasn't enough. Is that right? And that you needed a different approach. So what is it that was kind of missing? Or do they sort of do they fit together quite well? Are they a sort of double approach that you could use, or is one better than the other?
Yeah, so my specialty was pediatric neuropsychology. So I did a lot of testing with children that had developmental issues, learning disabilities, seizures, epilepsy, brain injuries. So that was my specialty. Like I tested children, and I did parent training as well, but most of my focus was on testing. And so I struggled with, I loved my job. I mean, I love testing, figuring out what's going on was always something that was fascinating to me. But I struggled with, after I gave the families the diagnosis, well, what did you do next? Because a lot of these kids, besides giving them school recommendations for, accommodations or whatever, there wasn't a lot you could do, especially with children that have like, I don't like to use this term, but what we call high functioning autism, where they don't have an intellectual disability, but they struggle with the social piece and, some of the other autism symptoms, such as getting stuck on things and being socially awkward. And so these families didn't know what to do with their children. Like, what do you do for if the child gets overwhelmed? There's a lot of these children don't do well with verbal therapy because they don't know how to verbalize very well. And they're too old for the traditional therapies like behavior therapy or something. And so they struggle with their issues. But when you get into mindfulness, you can teach this to any child. You can model it. You can teach them how to do breathing exercises. I mean, there is a learning curve. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think every child can pick up on all of these things, but if nothing else, you can sit with the child in mindfulness and help them that way. So this was a way for me to say, oh, here's what you do after you get the diagnosis. And here's how you do. And the other thing was I struggled with the parents because the parents have as many issues as the children do because they're so overwhelmed, they're stressed. There's a very high divorce rate among parents that have children with neurodiverse challenges. There's a lot of stress going on. So how do you help the parents? Because they sometimes don't have time for the therapy, the like regular therapy. They're the primary, parent for their child. But if you do this, if you do mindfulness, you and your child can do this together. You can do it at home. You can teach your child something that he can do at school where he doesn't have to worry about sticking out, like with some school accommodations. Some kids struggle with, well, I don't want everybody to see that I'm different because I have to do this. Nobody has to see you taking deep breathing breaks or, focusing on where your feet are resting on the floor. So that piece of mindfulness really called to me. This is something that the whole family can do together. It can help everybody's overwhelm and stress. And you don't need any special tools. You can do it at any time and you don't need to pay for it, right? You can just do it. Once you learn the techniques, you can do them at home all the time.
I did see, I've seen quite a lot on YouTube about mindfulness because originally I thought it was kind of similar to, I thought it was meditation originally. And it differs, correct me if I'm wrong, but it differs in that meditation, you're trying to sort of clear your mind. Whereas in mindfulness, you are focusing or letting your mind go, or you're focusing on specific areas.
Yeah. So mindfulness you can use mindfulness for almost anything. You can do it with any kind of activity. You can do it while you're walking. It's basically just being focused on the present moment. Meditation is doing something in particular that brings your mind to a clear, stable state. So you can use mindfulness to kind of meditate as well, but you can also use a mantra to meditate. You can use, focus on your heart to meditate. There are lots of different ways to meditate, but mindfulness you can do, you don't have to be you're not trying to bring your mind to a stable state. You're just bringing yourself to the present moment. So my favorite thing that I tell people to do when they're first trying to get into mindfulness is to focus on that first cup of coffee or tea in the morning. And just, if you completely immerse yourself, close your eyes and feel the steam hitting your face and smell the aroma, and your whole presence is completely focused on your cup. And that to me sets my motivation and my intention for the day, that I'm going to have a really good day today because I'm focused on my cup of tea. And so that's an easy way to do it. With children, you can do finger foods and teach them how to eat mindfully. I actually have made a booklet that I would like to offer your listeners if they want. I can give you the link at the end, but they can just go download it, and it's got several mindfulness activities you can do with your kids, as well as some self-compassion practices. So.
Brilliant. Yeah, great.
It sounds like in my house right now, someone is in need of some mindfulness practice, which is why I went on mute. But if you wouldn't mind a specific example, so whether it be I like a general principle that you would offer someone, which is there's a disagreement between parent and child, what would you advise in that particular general example?
So with the disagreement between, so I do offer I teach a lot of like behavioral techniques for families that are, because behavior is always going to be an issue between any parent-child. So what I tell parents to do is to, depending on the age of the child, is to come up with a list of possible punishments that they can both live with, and to have actually levels of punishments and give 2 punishments at each level. So for example, if it's a minor infraction, you would have 2 different choices of punishments at level 1, and I never use physical punishment. I very, very, very strongly advocate against physical punishment. There's not enough research to show it's effective. And to me, it's honestly a way of demeaning your child and losing their self-respect. So as you can tell, I'm really strongly on that subject. I'm very strong, but so give them 2 levels. And I always use examples like losing electronics, losing sugar treats, some things that you can live with and your child can live with, but they might be uncomfortable. And so you give like maybe 3 levels of punishments. And then when it comes time when they do something wrong, you let them pick. If you give your child a choice of punishment, chances are you're not going to have the meltdowns that you had before. And I've had really good results with this as I teach this to families. So, your child throws a tantrum because he doesn't want to clean his room. So you're like, okay, you give him a warning and say, if you're still going to be ranting about this and not going to do your room, you're going to get a punishment. And then say, so it's at level 1. So you pick one of the punishments at level 1 and let your child pick the punishment. But you've already come up with this beforehand. You don't want to, usually with neurodiverse children, you don't want to throw something at them unsuspecting. So you don't want to just add a punishment to level 1. You want to have already sat down with him and discussed which punishments are like, these are what the punishments are going to be. And he doesn't have to like them, because otherwise it's not really a punishment. But he has to be prepared for it. If he or she knows what's coming, they're less likely to fall apart when it comes time to say, okay, well, you just did this, and now you have to go pick level 1. You can even make it, have cards or something, or somewhere, a poster board where you have it written down, and let the child pick which punishment he gets. And if you really want to take it up a step, you can do a choice of punishments and rewards to get things done. This one is very effective, but I don't use it all the time. And I don't tell parents to do it all the time. It's usually better for like bigger projects or something. But you can say, if you don't clean your room, you're going to get this. You're going to get this punishment level 1. But if you do clean your room, you're going to get this reward. And that's not for daily things, but that's more for something big that, comes up. Like, I don't know, if you're at a grocery store and your child has a tantrum about wanting something, that's something you can use and say, if you come quietly to the car, I'll give you this. But if you don't, you're going to get this punishment.
Well, cleaning a room in my house is quite a big thing, actually, as well. I got 2 teenage daughters, so that's a pretty big.
Yeah, a lot of these things are geared towards younger kids, where teenagers, they have their own set of motivations. Actually, teenagers are good for doing that combination thing. But again, it depends on the child. Some kids are really difficult to motivate. Some kids are easily motivated with punishment. Some kids, you have to throw in that extra piece. So it's really, it's a case by case thing. You have to see.
Interesting.
Any follow up, Jake?
I don't know. I'm just trying to I'm trying to think of that, because I've tried so many different methods with my daughters, and they're both different. One is completely different from the other, and so there is no one size fits all for both of them. What would work with one is not going to work with the other, and so yeah, it's a struggle to keep on top of what should be little tasks, like keeping your bedroom tidy. Once you've tidied it, just maintaining it that way. But it's definitely sometimes a bit more of a challenge. So yeah, I'm trying to process how I might be able to integrate that and test that out.
That would be so that would be a good one to do a combo on. So you can say, if you can keep your room clean for a month, you'll get this. But every week your room is not clean, you'll get this punishment. Like, maybe, I don't know, if money is a motivator, you could give her like, whatever for the month, but every week that it's not done, you take away some.
Yeah, that's our current system, I think.
Oh yeah, that's, money
Yeah.
is a strong motivator for teenagers, and also electronic use or
Mm.
having gadgets, the phone, take away the phone or the tablet or whatever maybe.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. That's a whole other topic of conversation, I think. Thomas, your daughters are a bit younger, so I mean, do you use any method like that, or would you?
Yeah, I refer to them as incentives. So it's a slight difference in language, but it's essentially the same thing. The only thing I hadn't done was preparation in advance of taking away things that you don't necessarily have to give them, which I think is it's a great principle, because you, as you say, you don't want to spring anything on them in the time where they're particularly upset. But would you say, in relationship to, let's say, disagreements, or even not in disagreements, general things that parents do, which are, should we say, you wouldn't advise? So common mistakes that parents might make, excluding, of course, the physical stuff.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I focus on with parent training is mindful communication. So when you're having an argument with your child, a lot of parents get caught up in the moment, like it's human, and they respond angrily or get really emotionally caught up. So mindful communication teaches parents to remember to pause when you're in the middle of an argument and just step back for a minute and just take a few deep breaths. Well, for the parent and the child, but I'm focusing on the parents at first, because when you're able to take that pause, then you're able to regulate your own emotions and come back to the moment without losing your temper and saying something harsh or saying something that may be lost. Even if you have to step out of the room, I actually tell parents to take like a mommy or daddy timeout and tell your parent that you need the timeout because you're losing your temper or you're out of control, whatever. And if your child is old enough, go to the bathroom, take a few deep breaths, ground yourself, and then come back, and you're not going to react as strongly. And if you have your own mindful practice and you're doing something small every day, it doesn't have to be anything big, but even if you're just taking a 5-minute meditation or doing one mindful activity a day, you build up that calm in your own self, so that when these situations do come up, you're not immediately losing your temper and you're able to it's easier for you to take that step back, excuse me, and take that pause or the mommy daddy timeout. So pause could also be something where you take a few seconds and just imagine yourself somewhere where is your happy place. Mine is the beach. So if I have to take a timeout or something, I go step out, I take a few deep breaths. I imagine myself at the beach. I feel the sand on my toes and the sun on my face. And then once I've calmed down, it may just be a few minutes. Then when I come back, I'm not quite as, like riled up and so tensed that I'm ready to explode. I come back and I'm calmer and I can listen to what he's saying. Because a lot of times the kids are not, what they're crying about is not really what the issue is. There's something else going on. And if you're reacting instead of responding, you're not going to figure out what's going on with your child. And so that's a moment lost.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you would recommend, or is there a sort of a secret little technique that you can use in those 5 minutes, for example, when you say, look, I need a bit of time?
Yeah, no, there's several things you can do. I call this the positive pause, where you take a visualization exercise and imagine yourself doing something that you absolutely love or being in a place where you feel calm and at peace, and just completely immerse yourself in that visualization. And that allows you to calm down, and then you can come back and you're more engaged and more mindfully listening and respecting your child rather than getting caught up in the emotional aspect. The other thing is to do a quick meditation, and this is simply if you just ground yourself. So if you're sitting, you just feel yourself like melted into the seat. If you're standing, you can pretend like you're tall as a tree and you have roots coming down from your feet so that you're completely stable. And then you just take a few deep breaths and follow each breath all the way in and all the way out. And bring your attention back to the breath as you're, if you get distracted, and just do that for a few minutes. And that sometimes is all you need. Sometimes you just need that little pause or that little break to break the cycle of screaming and yelling at each other. And if you can take that little pause and you remember to take the pause, which is the difficult thing, right? Because once you're caught up, it's hard for you or your child to get out of it. But if you do something every day, it becomes kind of a routine, and then your body remembers to do that when you are caught up. And you're also in a much more, your resting state is much more grounded and calm than your typical state is if you have been meditating. There's a really cool research study I read about this really experienced meditator. He's a French monk, and they did this research study with him compared to a bunch of newbie meditators, and they did an MRI. So when the people were in the MRIs, they started doing a lot of distraction noises. They started doing cymbals and jumping and screaming, and all of the newbie meditators, all of their brains were lighting up all over the place. And this guy, nothing. He was completely calm the whole time. So nothing even fazed him. So I'm like, that to me shows me that if you are meditating every day and your kids are screaming and yelling and whatever, it's not going to bother you. Your mind's resting state has gotten so calm that those kind of things don't faze you anymore.
Well, whenever I've tried meditation, I've definitely not been like the monk. I've been, oh, what's that? What's this? What am I thinking of? And I find myself, because I've actually meditated on and off since I was a teenager, but more off than on. I haven't done so much of it, but I used to do sort of breath techniques. So I'd count my breaths, and then I actually counted to 9 for some reason. I think other people count to 10, and you could do whatever you want, I guess. But I'd count to 9, and then I'd start counting again, and then all of a sudden I'd realize I was on 38 or something like that. So I should repeat the cycle of 1 to 9, 1 to 9, and I'd be 38, 39. So I'm obviously not very good at it, but yeah, I'm intrigued by the concept of focusing on mindfulness rather than meditation, and focusing on not judging and just being, I guess, at peace with whatever thought or whatever problem you're thinking about. Is that really how it works?
Yeah, there's actually it's really interesting you say that, because have you heard of Eckhart Tolle? He's a very famous like spiritual author.
Okay.
He once had somebody come up to him and ask him, he was at a conference and there were like 4 days of seminars, and some student came up and said, there's like so many seminars to pick from. I don't know which one is the best way to get me to, to spiritually wake up or whatever. And Eckhart says, if you don't do anything else but just practice mindfulness, don't meditate, even if you just practice mindfulness every day, you will have learned more in, I think he said 3 months, than if you spent a lifetime doing these workshops and seminars. So the important point being that you don't have to do the meditation, like a seated meditation. You can just have mindfulness in your daily living. So just bringing yourself to the present moment while you're eating. Eating is a great way to do it. Your activities, if you're brushing your teeth, if you're washing dishes, focus on what you're doing right then. Don't think about the past or the future. Just be completely focused on that moment. And that is mindfulness. You don't have to do meditation. You just have to do something that reminds you to bring yourself back to a calm state. And whether you're doing that through meditation or through a mindful activity or through a walking meditation, which is great. Some people don't like seated meditations, but they love walking meditations. And some days you feel like doing one and not the other. So the important part of all of this is to be consistent. So even if you just do 5 minutes a day of a mindful activity, or 5 minutes a day of a walking meditation, or any of these practices, if you SelfCompassion break, that's in the booklet, by the way. Any of these things, if you just do one a day and you slowly build up over time as you see how much it affects you, that's the important thing. So like you've been meditating on and off, but you've still been doing it, which is great. And I would point out that the counting, that sometimes maybe you may get caught up in thinking if you're doing a lot of like counting or something. So you might want to try different types of meditations and see maybe one is more, calls to you more than the others. Or walking, maybe your forte. Walking meditation is great, especially if you're outside.
Yeah, I guess then there's the added benefit of to your health of walking around and being in the great outdoors and the fresh air. So yeah, I think the thing that I'm not quite clear on, I guess, is when, say, you had an argument with your teenage son or daughter about something, and I completely understand that it's a great idea. And when it comes to modeling, I get that as well. If you can take 5 and recuperate your sort of level your energy and remain calm, and then go back to it from that point of view, you're modeling that behavior to your child indirectly as well. So they're going to see that behavior and think, that's what I'm going to do, rather than just the usual reacting, and it just blows up and gets worse. So I get that, but I would find it, I think, quite difficult to go away and not think about that and not try and analyze, because I've got a very analytical mind. So I'd be constantly trying to analyze, what did they mean by that? What did I say? What can I do differently? What can they do differently? And all of that kind of thing. So that's totally the wrong thing to do, right?
Not necessarily. I think, I don't think that you would be thinking clearly in the moment though. So maybe, you can analyze it, but I would probably come back to it later before you said something to her. Because if you're caught up in the moment, your emotions, unless you've learned to be really calm and your emotions are not ruling your thinking, then your thinking may not be completely clear. So to get that clarity, you probably want to be doing it at a time when you're not caught up in the emotional part of it, and you're able to. And also taking that step back, not only does it let you emotionally regulate, but it also your child, she has a time to take a break as well. Because when you're both caught up, you're neither one of you is thinking clearly. And so part of the mindfulness practice is to get to the point where you're able to think clearly despite any emotions coming up, because you're able to look at that situation with a non-judgmental and kind of a clear manner. But you don't get that way immediately. That takes a lot of practice, and we're all human. We're not going to get it in 2 or 3 days. It's going to take months of practice. But remembering to just take that step back is the first piece, I think, because you're not thinking, you're probably not thinking clearly, and anything else that you say from that on, and this goes for adult relationships as well, by the way, anything that you say may be tainted with the emotional stuff that's coming up, and it's not going to be probably, you may say something you're going to regret later, which you don't want to do. So. But I do promise it gets better.
Is there anything that you feel that would be worthwhile sharing with the audience that we haven't spoken about today?
Let me think. I did touch on self-compassion. I really want to stress the self-compassion piece. I think so many parents, regardless of whether or not you have neurodiverse children, parenting is stressful for most people. And I think if you lose sight of the fact that you need to take care of yourself too, I like to use the oxygen mask analogy in the airplane, that you need to always remember to take care of yourself as well, because putting your children first is great, but if you don't take care of yourself in the process, you're also not being an effective parent. So just to remember to always, be sure that you're taking care of yourself as you need to be taken care of. Do some self-care practices. Like I said, the book that I'm going to let your listeners download has some self-compassion things in there, including a self-compassion break, which is just a quick thing you can do when you're in the middle of a crisis, to just take a step back, remind yourself to not be judgmental, and to remind yourself that you're not alone. Other people suffer. Suffering is universal, especially as a parent. So yeah, so that's I think the most important thing. I really think self-compassion is as important as mindfulness when teaching mindful parenting.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing today. Apologies if you heard any screaming in the background. Where is the best place for people to find you?
So so you can find me at my website. It's drrabia.com, drrabia.com. And if you do /podcast, you can go there to download the workbook. It's got some mindfulness activities in there and some self-compassion as well.
Jake, any closing thoughts?
Well, I like the thing that I think that really makes the most sense to me is taking that time. And I'm sure that this download and there's a lot of information about mindfulness now that there wasn't before. I guess it's something that's become a lot more widely understood. Not by me necessarily, because I'm still trying to struggle with the difference between mindfulness and meditation. But I will get there. I do really, really get the taking the time to So find your rebalance and find your space. That makes complete sense to me. And the other thing about defining in advance what will happen if with bad behavior. So whether you want to call whatever you want to call that, rewards or punishments or any other word, but the terminology doesn't matter. It's the concept of defining it first, because I can imagine it's almost like you don't even need, you just need to mention that, oh, remember, and they'll start thinking, oh yeah, okay, I don't want to have one of these 3 already defined punishments or whatever it might be called. So I can see how that initially it might take a bit of time, but it's almost like a training process or a modeling process again, so that they're going to recognize in advance, I don't want this, I don't want that, whether I don't want my some money to be reduced, or I don't want to have my mobile device taken away from me, whatever it might be. As long as they know in advance, I think that they're going to start rectifying their behavior before that happens after a while. So I really get that too. Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Thank you very much for your time, and I will speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.